If you grew up loving movies in the late 1970s and early 1980s, there's a good chance a bicycle played a role in your imagination of freedom. And few films captured that feeling better than the 1979 classic Breaking Away. Set in Bloomington, Indiana, the film follows a group of working class friends, the Cutters, trying to figure out who they are and where they belong in a college town that often treats them like outsiders. At the center of it all is Dave Stoller, a kid who becomes obsessed with Italian cycling culture and dreams of becoming something more than what the world seems to have planned for him. On the surface, Breaking Away is a coming of age story. It's about friendship, class, and figuring out what kind of adult you want to become. It's also about bicycles, and it's also about the road. And once you start looking closely, that road turns out to be a surprisingly political place. Because the history of cycling in America isn't just about sport or recreation. It's about who gets to use public space, who has the right to move safely through a community, and how Americans have argued, sometimes for more than a century, about what our streets are actually for. And that's where today's guest comes in. James Longhurst is a historian of technology and transportation and the author of Bike Battles, a history of sharing the American road, a fascinating study of the long struggle between cyclists, drivers, and policymakers, and cities over how the road should be shared. His work reminds us that debates over bike lanes, road safety, and transportation policy didn't suddenly appear in the 21st century. They've been part of American life since the very beginning of the automobile age. So today, we're going to use Breaking Away as our starting point. We'll talk about what the film captures about cycling culture in the 1970s, how it fits into the longer history of America's bike battles, and how the politics of the road have evolved since the film hit theaters in 1979. Because the story of a kid racing around southern Indiana on a bike turns out to be part of a much bigger story about American culture, transportation, and the ongoing fight over who belongs on the road. I'm Jason Herbert, and this is A Reckoning. My name is Jason Herbert. I'm a Southerner who lives in the West. I'm a historian, an outdoorsman, and a movie buff. I like finding new answers to old questions, and this is A Reckoning. Okay, so what I didn't tell you before we started recording just a second ago was I have actually been looking. When I started doing this pod 3 years ago, there were just lists of films that you want to talk about, right? And a lot of them were stuff that we grew up with, like the Goonies. And I was telling my girlfriend the other day, I'm my target audience. I want late X, early millennial people, right? Because that's me. And I was ultimately I want to talk about the stuff. And I had thought about Breaking Away forever. This is a film that I've always kind of loved, even though it's set in the beleaguered state of Indiana, maybe in a Kentucky. And I just, I was like, I can't do it. But I've loved this movie, James, for the longest time. And then we were talking the other day on Blue Sky. I was like, wait a second, you do bicycles. Have you found yourself talking about this movie a lot? Because you sent me some homework
all the time.
Okay,
all the time. This movie has a very strange staying power, both in you're right, generationally in Gen X, but also in the cycling community, and then also it hits a soft spot in people's hearts.
It does. It's got this cool class issue that we'll talk about, these things, this coming of age thing. I watched the trailer 3 times before I rewatched the film the other day, because I just got, it was I rented it on Amazon Prime, and I wanted to see how they were marketing the film in 1979 too. And I think that that's sometimes a really important way to see who they think the audience for this is and how they're building it. And sometimes that doesn't always align, and sometimes it really does kind of nail itself. Man, you're right. I just love this movie. It's so, and it's weirdly, I've got these weird parts of this film that I always remember, like the rock quarry and stuff, like the swimming scene with Dennis Quaid.
And one way to think about it is it shouldn't be as good as it is.
Thank you.
For being as small of a film and as having so many unknowns in it, and really being sort of a strange thing in Peter Yates' career, it's different. And if you described it to someone, they would say, "Oh, that sounds terrible. It sounds treacly. It sounds like of its time, and it's never going to last." And it has a continuing power that I don't think you would expect.
No, in fact, I start to think about it, and we'll talk about this throughout the pod. Like, we talk about like the great sports films of all time, and I don't know that this gets enough credit because I kind of feel like it deserves in that conversation in so many different ways.
And I wonder if newer generations are forgetting it. But when people put together lists of great sport films, this sometimes pops up, and it has that underdog quality of Hoosiers, of Rudy, of other great sports films that captures an audience and sort of sticks with people and sort of transcends. Because I don't assume that the people who have an emotional connection to this movie have ever raced a bicycle before, and yet it somehow transcends that.
No, it totally does, right? And I kind of wonder, like, you wrote this book, Bike Battles: A History of Sharing the American Road, right? Which is about bicycling, but it's about more than. And I'm kind of wondering, did you come to this film before you started like writing this book? Like, how did you first come to this film? Is my question.
Oh well, I mean, I think, and this is sort of debatable. I'll have a conversation with my mom about this. I think I remember seeing this movie in like a movies in the park type of situation, because of it has such a sort of family. I think that probably in like the summer of 1980, I probably saw this in a movies in the park thing, because I vaguely remember. And I think that there's enough. I was young enough that the racy parts of this, no pun, are had an impact. The coming of ageness of it had an impact. But then also it was a sweet movie. But at that time, and as a young person, I was not a competitive cyclist. I'm an adult onset cyclist, and I came to the subject of bicycling in quite a unintended and roundabout way. I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to introduce myself as a historian.
Go for it. No, I was about to ask you to do the exact same thing, so go for it.
I'll introduce myself. My name is James Longhurst. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse, on the far western side of Wisconsin. And I describe myself as a historian of urban environmental policy, which is many words, but it sort of means I'm interested in the past decisions that people and institutions have made that have transformed the places where we live, work, and play into really surprisingly unhealthy, unsustainable, and unjust places. And so I wrote a doctoral dissertation in my first book on air pollution control in Pittsburgh in the 60s and 70s. I went to Carnegie Mellon for my graduate school. And that's what I was interested in. I was interested in how people fight over the place they live and they work, and how those fights sort of give away more than you'd think. When people engage in those public policy fights, what they're talking about often is how they imagine a family and a society should be. They're not just talking about pollution. They're talking about how in their mind things should be organized. And I did that, and I was in the process of publishing my dissertation as my first book. I was looking around for another project. And this was 2008, and I was starting a new job, and I was starting to go to my new job. And it was a periodic in America energy crisis in 2008, and gas was unexpectedly expensive at that time, and in a way that I had not done previously in my life. I had not been a bike commuter. I had just started doing a little bit of road cycling. I said, well, I'll ride my bike to work.
Mm.
And not only was I almost killed repeatedly, but I was yelled at while I was being almost killed. And if so, I was sort of casting around for this. Oh, I need another topic where people get unduly angry, and bicycles on American roads obviously thrust itself at me, and so that became my second project. But what I'm doing is I'm not a historian of the bicycle. I'm a historian of why have we made cities where it's extremely difficult for kids to bike to schools, for to seniors to have any other method of getting around except for an automobile. Why did we design our cities this way? And can we make better decisions if we understand those past fights? And so that became eventually the book named Bike Battles. I had an idea for a title. I was originally going to name it The Bike in the City as an homage to my doctoral dissertation advisor's book, Joel Tarr's book, The Horse in the City, which
I
is
know the
about...
book very well.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. Joel Tarr, Clay McShane. And I was pitching this idea at presses, and I said, well, what I want to write about is these periodic public policy debates about transportation. And the editors at the University of Washington Press took that and they translated it. Oh, you want to write about bike battles? I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to write about. So that's where the title came from. So I only returned to thinking about this movie and whatever movies or television or pop culture that talk about what Americans think about the bicycle over the last century and a bit. I only returned to that, having gotten my doctoral dissertation and become a historian. And as I started thinking about these various touch points in my life, I was like, oh, wow, actually I remember breaking away. I remember this really unexpected movie. And it became part of the way that I told the story of bicycles in America.
I'm kind of wondering. I was thinking about this, about you were talking about riding yourself, and I was trying to think of my own relationship with a bike, right? Which was, as a kid growing up in Kentucky, it was the primary source of transportation because I lived out in the country, so all of my friends lived 2, 3, 4, 5 miles away, and through the woods, right, in like Western Kentucky. So you would we all had like the BMX bike, and we just tore ass through the woods until we got to wherever and we were like phenomenally good at this because you got really, really good on the bike when you're 10 years old and was the only way to see your friends or to get down to the lake or whatever. And then that stops. You get a little bit older and then you get a car and then you stop riding your bike. At least I did. And we were commuting back and forth to town, which was like 20 miles away or whatever. And I didn't really ride for the longest time. And then I do my graduate school at the University of Minnesota, which turns out to be one of the great biking cities in the country. I think Minneapolis and Portland have this thing, right, between who can bike off each other. And I was biking back and forth. I was living on campus housing. It was 2 miles away, and Minneapolis doesn't want you driving your car in the city. Neither does Seattle. There's a lot of cities that don't want you driving. They want you riding. They want public transit. They want you on a bike. And I loved it until my beloved Trek got stolen outside of my graduate housing. And this was I'm going through my divorce. I'm making $19,000 a year on a stipend. I'm living in some shitty basement apartment. That Trek was one of the few things that in my life that was good and valuable. And some dude took it away from me. I was pretty pissed off. And then I had to go to Dick's Sporting Goods and buy a $300 beater or whatever, which is fine. It got me through for a while. And then finished graduate school and stopped riding again. Right. But for a while, this becomes the way I get around. I never considered it a passion, but I definitely enjoy it. It's hey, I can get extra calories done. I can do 2 miles in to campus. I can do 2 miles back. I can zip around campus real easy. There's a sense of a freedom with a bicycle, especially in bike-friendly towns.
Yeah, and of recovering lost childhood and the independence of movement And you have this conversation. There's a terrible and overused trope that says Americans have a love affair with the car, and there are emotional connections with the automobile. That's very much true. But if that's a love affair, it's quite an abusive love affair, because it's forced on most Americans. You don't actually have a choice. And you sort of said that Minneapolis and Portland they want you to bike, and many other American cities and suburbs and towns don't want you to have anything except for the private automobile. And this is the part of it that I'm thinking that we see and can talk about this emotional, and you can talk to a lot of people and say, well, what kind of bike did you have when you were a kid? And it will open up a lot of conversations, and people will have an emotional connection, emotional association. But that ability to travel in this way or that way is something that is mediated and shaped by the city and by political decisions that are larger than any of us. I also want to say that a lot of people in cities that have that available to them develop powerful associations with the subway, which once you master a subway, and you can get from one side of the city to another, that also has an emotional association, and sometimes a romanticism, but also a freedom and of mobility. So it's people's association with bicycles is sometimes rational or purposeful or utilitarian, but it's also very often it's a powerful identity, because it's how people discover themselves in space beyond just the home for the first time. I feel bad if there's generations that are not going to have that.
Yeah, I wonder about, because my boys are not bike riders down in Florida, right? Because everything's so, you've got to take cars to get to places and stuff. And like my younger boy, he'll ride he's got like this trike kind of thing, this kind of cool trike thing he rides around his neighborhood. But they never really had that BMX moment where it's kind of ingrained on them. They've got bikes, but I don't know that they ever like imprinted on them.
Well, having lived in and around Tampa for a while, I can tell you that there's certain a certain design hostility to moving either on 2 feet or by bicycle that make that really extremely difficult. You can't discover and transcend the neighborhoods or boundaries of a city when there is no infrastructure to do that on, which is, and that's what I wanted to do in bike battles. What I sort of discovered is the why of that. Why are Portland and Minneapolis different? Why are most American cities really averse to public transit and to pedestrianism and bicycles and to anything else? And there are reasons for that, but one of the things I want to say, and I always want to leave audiences and students with this, is the thing that I found in researching as a historian is none of it was inevitable. We didn't have to build cities this way, and there were and are so many instances where things can come out a little bit differently, and it's historical contingency that things did not. And so discovering what I wrote about in bike battles, that there's an entire movement of the 1890s that nobody ever remembers, to build a bicycle specific separated network called the side path movement. Nobody remembers that. And that fails. One of the places where it leaves its imprint is Minneapolis and the Twin Cities.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
That's one of the reasons that the MSP is different than the rest of America. There's other opportunities in World War II. There's the Victory Bike, and people are thinking that is a real necessity and a strategic necessity in World War II. And then it turns out the Victory Bike program is, for various reasons, more rhetorical than reality. And so the United States could have exited World War II with a strong commitment to different kinds of transportation because of need. And yet the opposite happens. All other, transit and trolleys and and long distance trains really get used up and destroyed, and are replaced by interstate highways after World War II. And then, Oregon, Portland's different because Oregon in the 1970s bike boom passes a unique state level funding law, the bike bill, which dedicates a mere 1% of transportation infrastructure funding to bicycle infrastructure, and that 1% completely transforms what Portland is and what a variety, Eugene and other, and makes it different in the trajectory of the nation. So this is what I want to say to students, that we turned out one way, but there were a lot of opportunities to do it a different way. And one of those opportunities is always right in front of us. We can always choose to do something different right now, and that changes the future if we wanted to.
I'm wondering, as you're looking back on this film, do you think the film knowingly captured the bike boom of the 70s, or is this kind of like a thing it happened to tell this coming of age story? It seems, before I read your book, I wasn't aware of this bike boom of the 70s. This film comes out in 79, and I'm kind of wondering, do you think that this was purposely trying to get in on this new fad, this new moment, or it's like we've seen other? I'm thinking about Teen Wolf and basketball, and I'm thinking about Varsity Blues and football. You've got a coming of age story of a townie. Here they're cutters, right? But like we've seen this version in other film, Rocky, right? Why bicycling? Is like Dave is fascinated with the Italians in this. Like, what's going on here? Are they actually capturing this, or is this a coincidence?
I actually, this is buckle up, because this is not cheerful. I love this movie. I partially love this movie because I think that it captures how Americans don't think of the bicycle as a serious object for adults. And I think this movie partially exists not because America has a change of heart about what the bicycle means or is interested in the bicycle. This movie partially exists because it's a screenplay written by an immigrant from Yugoslavia who's experiencing American college life, and it's directed by a British director. So it comes out of the mindset of people who understand different possibilities and ways of getting around, and that also don't make a big deal of it necessarily. The bicycle is just there in this story, and as such, the parts of the movie that are praising the bicycle are also sort of pointing out how foreign and strange the bicycle is, because Dave can't just get excited about the bicycle and win at the bicycle races he goes to. He feels that he needs to, for various reasons, adopt an Italian persona, a foreign persona, to go with his fantastic Italian bicycle, which is really not available to the American public, the mass market. In the story of Breaking Away, Dave has won a bicycle as a prize at a race, and it's a Mazzi Grand Criterium, and that bike not only would be very expensive, but it really wouldn't even be available. Physically wouldn't be in very many, except for high-end shops. There was like one Mazzi shop in California at the time. And Dave's sort of adopting of a different persona is both about him trying to find his identity in this sort of deindustrialized space where he doesn't know what class means, but also in his mind, bicycling well and having a romance for bicycle racing is distinctly un-American. And it fits sort of the two modes that Americans for most of the 20th century think of the bicycle as. After the golden age of the turn of the century of the 1890s, the bicycle is either for children or it's foreign. Those are the only two things it's never really fully. It can't be for an American adult. And as Dave grows out of his teenage years, the only way that bicycling can be for him, if he wants to be an adult, is it has to be foreign. So I think one of the things that this movie is capturing is how Americans don't really know how to think of the bicycle, or don't really know how to make it American for them.
I'm wondering, like, when does that transition take? Because one of the things as I was going into reading the book was like, wait a second, are bicycles transportation or are they recreation? Right. And now there's this other thing with like the Peloton and stuff like that we could talk about a little bit later on. But like, how are Americans conceptualizing this thing? It's only a thing for kids. So, when does this transition begin to take place? I'm guessing after the film, but like, does it still take a while? Are we into the 21st century before this click starts to take place, or is this a gradual thing that happens over time?
I'd like to point to a cultural anthropologist, Louis Vivanco, and he has a book called Reconsidering the Bicycle. And one of the things he says about the bicycle, like other objects, that the bicycle can have multiple nonlinear conflicting meanings. And these meanings and these associations both change over time, transition, as the word that you said, but then also older ideas persist to the point that you have multiple layers of meaning that are piled on top of each other, and they can be completely contradictory, and individuals and groups can have one meaning and other groups can. And so when we say the same word bicycle, a politician, for example, they will hear whatever association they have, and it could be West Coast California fitness. It could be green machine, environmental sustainability, not dependent upon foreign oil. It could mean childish. It could mean urban elites. It could mean individual freedom for women who otherwise would not have access to mobility. It means, and these ideas shift and change over time, but they never entirely go away. And so you have these, by the time of here in the 21st century, we have all of these old ideas layered on top of each other, and it makes for a deeply conflicting situation when somebody says, they're riding their bicycle. It could mean that they're a minimum wage dishwasher going home at night with a plastic shopping bag off of one handlebar, and it could mean that they have a $15,000 ceramic bearing full carbon frame. And I'm riding my bicycle means both of those two things. So the transition about when is the bicycle for children and when is it for adults and when is it for transportation and when is it for recreation, those are all layered on top of each other now over a century and a half that it's really hard to. But to do it really, really quickly, one of the things that I think people in the present might not know is that when the safety bicycle, so the bicycle with two equal size wheels and a chain that drives the rear one, and the safety bicycle, and it's named safety because it's more safe than the high wheel, which is just insane. Nobody should ride that. It's so terrifying. It's for gymnasts and idiots. And if anyone rides a high wheel out there, you're a very brave person.
I'm not really worried about offending the high wheel bicycling segment of our listening base. Whichever one of you is out there, know that we send our kindest regards.
Well, look, I'm more likely to run into this person.
Okay.
And when I say this person, I'm more likely to run into this man because women are too smart to
That's
ride
fair.
this. So when the safety bicycle comes to the United States, it is expensive and is associated with high status leisure recreation. And it is a huge fad in the 1890s in the golden age. It's a huge nationwide fad. And it shows up in songs and plays and sheet music, and newspapers are just filled with stories about the exploits of bicycles. It's extremely exciting, a little bit titillating because it allows courtship away from prying eyes and sort of breaks down Victorian social boundaries. And it's seen as both transportation, and it's possible for workers to very quickly cover longer spaces. But it's really not available for workers in the 1890s. It's really an expensive object. It is a high status object. And its association with high technology as well, because it is high technology in the 1890s. The people who are drawn to it are later the people who experiment with the other really expensive high technology of transportation, which is the automobile and the motorcycle. And they transition over that same group. So its first association is with this sort of high status. And I'm going to come back here because I want to talk more about the social history of the bicycle later. But you've asked me a question, and it's only as the bicycle comes down in price in the 20th century that it really becomes associated with children, and that's one of the things that makes it really weird when World War II sort of asks adults to take to the bicycle for wartime commuting when rationing of gasoline and rubber and other strategic materials make it necessary. That this is seen as really quite a sacrifice for adults to be riding a bicycle, and that's a very strange thing. And there's very few adult bicycles available, and that's what the Victory Bike becomes. And so, throughout the middle of the 20th century, bicycles are just for kids, and the number of adults that would be seen on a bicycle is incredibly small. And there's a small culture of touring, but it doesn't, through the 50s and 60s, but it doesn't really break through to a larger culture. And it's really in the decade of the 1970s, late 60s, 70s, where a couple of different overlapping trends, new technology finally brings multi-speed bicycles to America, even though they've been in Europe and Japan for a very long time, because bicycles have been for kids in America, and kids, we should not buy expensive things for kids. We should only buy durable, single speed, heavy, they're sometimes called gas pipe bikes of the 1950s. These really heavy single speed, big tire, balloon tire bikes. And narrow tire, multi-speed rear derailleur bikes come into the United States in the 1960s and the 70s. And to the point that Americans don't really have names for those.
Mm-hmm.
And so they stick the name 10-speed on them, even though they might have different speeds than that. But the name, when I was growing up, 10-speed meant adult, lightweight, high technology handbrake. So new technology, environmentalism as a movement, increasing interest in adult cardiovascular exercise, and bicycling really sort of does that before jogging hits in the 80s. And then finally, in the 1970s, the twin energy crises of 1973 and 1979. And then that is the thing that sort of unleashes adult bicycling.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in America is that adults return to the bicycle in that time, and it's been a century since someone designed a city that allowed for adult bicycling. And so the laws and the infrastructure and the culture are really not prepared for that. The bad news of my book, Bike Battles, is I believe rather strongly that 1970s bike boom opportunity was squandered. We also didn't rebuild the cities at that point in time. It's only until now, until the 21st century, that there's some minor in large cities. We have some breakthroughs in protected bicycle infrastructure. And if people have been to larger cities, have been to Chicago, LA, New York. You'll see Seattle, Austin. You'll see bike share as becoming sort of an assumed that every city will have a bike share system, and will also have some measure of protected bike lanes. And that is a very new thing. And from the advocate's point of view, it's a heavy lift because we're attempting to rebuild cities in a certain way after a century of not doing it that way.
One of the things I'm thinking about is actually not this film. And I'm thinking about actually a TV series. The very first time we hear of Jed Bartlett on the West Wing, it's right after he's run his bike into a tree, right? And I'm thinking about this, James, in terms of this. I'm like, there's a reason why they chose biking for him to have this accident, because he's this liberal, progressive president, and he's got to be doing something that represents that, right? And I'm thinking about these policies. It's not a surprise that you have this biking boom during the Carter administration, which I am hellbound and determined to resurrect in so many different ways. But I'm kind of wondering, has biking always been tied to a politically liberal standpoint? Do conservatives ride bicycles?
I'm gonna come to that question. I just wanted to point out that your observation about the West Wing using the bicycle to sort of do a shorthand identification of somebody, I think that there's a lot of that. And if you just start thinking of your favorite television show, that the cultural associations that I was talking about the bicycle very often get used in narrative drama to do that sort of shorthand characterization. So if you remember the television drama 30 something.
Oh, sure.
There was a character who had he didn't have a lot of characterization to start with, but he was characterized as not having grown up as the rest of his friends had. He hadn't started a family.
And Peter Horton's character.
The way that they showed that he hadn't grown up is he wore an old high school varsity jacket.
Mm-hmm. He
was a college literature professor, and he rode his 10-speed bicycle everywhere. And so that identification is a shorthand to say, okay, well, this person is quirky and interesting, and they haven't grown up. The Amazon Jack Ryan television show.
Mm-hmm.
The first time we see him bicycling to Langley, he's riding his bicycle with a messenger bag slung across on some of the new bicycle infrastructure of Washington, D.C. And, this identifies him as not a square, right? As, athletic and moving through the world, but also interesting. And so this shorthand of bicycle has cultural meaning shows up a lot. I just wanted to point that out, but it gets to your question of, bicycles have had meaning across the political aisle. And I think the answer to that is a really quick yes. I'm aware that our political parties have changed sides multiple times, but when I was talking about the 1890s bike boom, the bicycle becomes associated a great deal with the Republican Party, and it's a symbol of young, active white men in cities who work in newly clerical jobs, and so they're interested in demonstrating their masculinity in other ways. And so, this is a thing we always say about farmers. Farmers don't become cyclists because they sweat. They get their labor in other ways. They're not looking for labor in their recreation. But guys that are working in a shop all day, the bicycle becomes a very important symbol of their upward mobility, but also their masculinity and virility. And so there's been some really good history that's been written about the political associations known as the bicycling bloc, BLOC. And so there's that association that a lot of people have forgotten about because it's forgotten history. But I'm also gonna tilt my camera up here. I understand that podcasts are a visual medium, but
by all means. Oh, look at that. Okay,
so
you want to
this
explain
is
what we're looking at?
this is a poster, and it says there's nothing like a bike, and
That's very cool.
It says Dr. Paul Dudley White, national chairman of the American Bike Month. And the thing is that Paul Dudley White was a famous household name for a short while. But I fear that only historians now remember him. But Paul Dudley White was known as President Eisenhower's cardiologist. And this is a time where I think many Americans were learning what the word cardiologist meant. And Paul Dudley White was interviewed in the press and became sort of a spokesperson for cardiovascular health. And he promoted the bicycle as this tool, and in a way that a lot of people I don't think had really thought about. So I do think that there's moments before the 1970s association of the bicycle with the environmental movement or as a green machine, where the bicycle has had different and complicated political meanings. And this is one of the things that I will say, the history of the victory bike in World War II, that riding a bicycle as an adult was a visible sign of commitment to the war. And because it was a thing that adults wouldn't normally do. And so if you were riding a bicycle, you were clearly doing so in order to save wartime materials. And so it was a deeply patriotic thing to do, in a way that television advertising convinces us today that driving a very large truck is deeply patriotic, is a thing that is sort of wrapped in the flag. That riding a bicycle in World War II was a symbol of being sacrificed for patriotic purpose.
I want to ask you about class, because you and I were kind of emailing back and forth, because obviously class is such an important undertone to this. There's a reason why this film is set in Bloomington, Indiana, in the heartland of America. What does this movie have to tell us about this group and the choice of a bicycle as the quite literally vehicle for their deliverance in this film? Like, what does this movie talk about when it talks about class with the Cutters?
One of the things that I would say that this movie talks about, and it's possibly one of the reasons that this movie has more staying power, has more purpose, is it's quite possible that this movie is more clearly and openly about class than a lot of American films. And I might still, chalk this up to Yugoslav immigrant screenplay writer and a British director. Do you know the joke? This is something I've heard in film criticism circles, that they say that American films, whether they say it or not, are always about race, and British films, whether they say it or not, are always about class. And so this is a British filmmaker, a British director, making a film that speaks more of class and more directly than I can really point to a lot of other American films. And to talk about class, not as part of labor history or not part of unionization, but as a part of everyday existence and part of our lives and identity. I think that the way that Breaking Away is about class, from its beginning shots to its end, are a thing that I think elevates it beyond just being an underdog movie about sports or about a bicycling movie or something like that. I think it elevates it a great deal. I think there's other films that are of the same time period. I really like Slapshot with Paul Newman, which is also a deindustrialization film. And then, can I remember? Blue Collar.
I don't think I've seen this. No, tell me.
Blue Collar. Okay, all right. When I tell you the actors, I'm gonna
feel like an ass. Go ahead.
It's crazy. I think Blue Collar is partly forgotten as well, and I don't really know why. But it's Richard Pryor, Yaphet Kotto, and Harvey Keitel. 1978, automotive factory workers. And they sort of go through a wild story of trying to set up they're going to steal from the labor union, and then they find the labor union's corrupt, and then they try to blackmail the labor union. And so that's a wild film, and is more unashamedly about class and class identity than I think a lot of American films. And I like Slapshot because it's a deindustrialization film. But the way that Breaking Away is, sort of the idea that we as historians have occasionally spent too much time cataloging the ills and the disasters and the negatives of a moment in time, and we forget to capture the joy of people's lives, because people are in the midst of difficult moments in their in history. Historians are going to write about the war and the famine and Jim Crow, and about imperial hegemony and oppression, and we're going to write about all of those things, and patriarchy. We're going to write about all those things, and yet people also live their lives and find joy amidst that oppression. And then Breaking Away does that. Breaking Away is, in some ways, a depressing story about a man who's lost his job and his purpose in life as a stone cutter, and that work is largely disappearing. And Dave's father has one of is acerbically rude in the movie, but then also has one of the most tearful moments when he talks about cutting the stone for the university, and then somehow when the stone is cut and the buildings go up, they don't feel welcome there. It's an amazingly powerful line, and it's dropped like a bomb from this character actor that has been funny up to that point. And it not only talks about class and the moment of deindustrialization, the moment of late 70s deindustrialization, and what is the purpose of America and the American dream, when that dream doesn't really exist anymore. And the town gown silliness of the movie is also talking about exceptionally hard truths. So it's, this is some of the greatness of this movie, is it looks slight. It looks like it's not about anything. And it is really touching on extremely powerful moments of class, not only as class as how one works and how much one gets for that, but also the social segregation of class and the markers of class. I struggle to think of other movies in America that have done that sort of thing. I've heaped a lot of praise on this film. I do want to say here at this moment, one more thing is, I think this is not only a powerful movie about class, it's actually a shockingly good movie about positive masculinity.
Thank you.
And in a way that shows the good and the bad, the failings and the breakthroughs. But it's also a situation where I can't think of a lot of other. I have Sinners on the brain a lot, and I'm thinking about Sinners is also a movie about family relations and money and about masculinity. But this is also, it shouldn't be this good, and yet it is.
Yeah. Okay. A couple things. This episode's going to come out a few days after what I hope Sinners will win the Best Picture, because I
Uh-huh.
think I look back and I think Sinners might be the second best film of the 21st century. I've got Social Network as my number one. Um, but I think what you're talking about here with this film, and this is why I think there was always this enjoyment, and this is the reason why I've really come to love films. And if there's any one, there's so many great things that have happened because of both historians of the movies, and then as this podcast became its own thing, James, because all of a sudden, all of these things that I loved, these things on screen, especially growing up working class, kind of poor in Kentucky and Louisiana, and then I would watch these movies on HBO and find it's funny you said the word joy, because
Mm.
as you were talking beforehand, I wrote down the word joy on my notebook here because I'm always scribbling as people are talking, so I make sure I stay with the conversation. Um, and I wrote the word joy as you were talking. I'm like, that's the thing that always comes to me with this film. When he's on that bike, he's finding this
Right.
freedom. He's finding this, and his friends are so damn supportive of him. They're his boys. There is no
Yeah.
like sense of like, why are you doing this? It is this unquestionable, like, we're in it with you, dude. And then even the conversations with his dad, right? The dad's got this initially like kind of thing, and then he like you start to see why his dad feels the way he does and talks like you talk that you're absolutely right. When you start talking about that talk that he gives about cutting the stone and not feeling like he belongs anymore, you're working class people like I am growing up. You feel that in your bones. And I've wrestled with class dynamism no matter, no matter where I'm at, and I've struggled with that here in Colorado. And damn it, I'm a 48-year-old man. I shouldn't have to feel like I don't belong, but sometimes I still do. Right.
And
Um,
that conversation that Dave's dad has with him as he walks uh, onto the campus at night and looks at the stone, that conversation comes after sort of a strange scene earlier, just not just before, but a little bit earlier, where Paul Dooley, the actor, goes out to the quarry and to the mill that he worked in. And this, I say, it's a strange scene in that there's not a lot happening there except for you're watching the actor go back to the place where he felt meaning and go through the motions of swinging himself up onto a machine and driving a wedge, and that that scene doesn't fit into the narrative of the story of Dave and the bicycle and his friends at all, and yet it sets in our minds this association of that actor and that character has more to say than just to complain about Italian food. He has a surprisingly large amount to say. It's a movie that should not be as good as it is.
it has, and this is kind of what I was getting back to. This is where I've really come to love with these films, is when you start to look at them through these lenses and go, wait a second. And the first time this ever happened was when I was watching Trading Places, right? It was like with the fifth film we ever did on Historians of the Movies on the watch party back in like 2018. I was like, wait a second. These movies have a lot to unpack. And you
Right.
can do so in a really fun way, like when we're talking about this. Um, I want to ask you about a thing that we're talking about Italians. And now I got to talk about another American who's writing for some Italians, and like this transition, I started to become aware of cycling with Greg LeMond. And then later
Right.
on, we can't not talk about Armstrong. He's too important to the story of cycling in the United States and globally. And the rise and fall of Lance Armstrong could be its own pod. But what did these two guys, specifically the latter, mean to the ways in which Americans engage with bicycles, in the latter part of the 20th and the early 21st centuries?
I appreciate you phrased it. We got to talk about, and I think that's probably right. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about it though, because as I said that that what I want to write about mostly is, and what I'm most interested in is the utilitarian and the
Sure.
transport part of it. But I got dragged into writing about bicycles in culture because one of the things that I as a pure policy historian, I'd love to say, oh well, institutions make decisions, and it turns out people make decisions on their gut instincts. And so what the culture says about bicycles actually puts a big thumb on the scale about law and politics and funding and financing and infrastructure and all those things. And so you're probably right. We got to talk about the professional and competitive cycling as well. I think that the success of Greg LeMond from Minnesota, and his spouse grew up here just across the river in La Crescent, and of later Lance Armstrong, matters, but it doesn't matter as much as you might think, because road cycling as a part of American society has been a subculture since the 1890s bike boom. It's never had that success again, and it's always been a fairly small subculture. So while people love the story of Lance Armstrong, and everybody loves a winner and loves success, and went out and got road bikes, that didn't really change the way that Americans got around as transportation or the way that cities were built. It didn't transform cycling in America. I think that the story of Lance Armstrong is important. I still don't know what to make of it, though. And my research in bike battles, I wanted to stop in about 1980 or so. And there's a couple of reasons why that was happening. I had a series of stories that I knew I could tell with the sources that I had. And I was looking at the 1980s, and I knew that I would have to do 3 or 4 different things that I didn't want to do. And one of them was, I knew I would have to completely start over and tell a story of mountain biking, which is an American invention. I knew that I would have to tell a story of a different bike battle, which is the fight over the helmet. And this movie, Breaking Away, is sort of an interesting moment where most of the biking we see by most people is they're not wearing helmets. The only time that Dave puts a helmet on.
Watching that.
It's shocking to you, and yet it's the way that most people have ridden a bicycle everywhere in the world for most of its existence. As I like to joke, civilized societies don't wear helmets on bicycles. And just to pacify everyone, I wear a helmet a fair amount, but not always. And I knew I didn't want to get into that fight because I knew what the sources were like. Mm-hmm. And then I was also looking ahead to Greg LeMond and Lance Armstrong and going, well, what am I going to say about that? And I couldn't really figure it out. I was like, okay, well, we'll stop at about 1980 or so.
Well, I think it's also fair. It's like, I don't want to talk about Reagan. It's like, I don't want to talk about the downfall. Because here's my historical joke: everything bad can be traced to Reagan.
I've had students tell me that joke back. Actually,
well, there's hope then, James. Yeah. I kind of wonder. Here in Colorado, we are in the midst of a debate over high-speed rail because, for the love of God, we need more than just I-25 running from Wyoming to New Mexico. And I kind of wonder, as we're talking, I'm seeing these kind of parallels between these debates over trains and bikes, and these two phenomenally successful ways of moving people around, whether over large scale trains or short scale. And then there's this huge pushback for things that clearly work. Why is that?
So that is the most difficult and important question. And if the people who are listening don't already know this, I'm going to bore them all. But in the last several decades in the 21st century, a whole literature, an interdisciplinary international literature known as mobilities studies, has sprung up, and it's different from environmental history. It's different from urban history. It's fairly different from transportation history. And mobility studies has at its it's associated with the organization, the International Association for Transport, Traffic, and Mobility, known as T2M, and the Journal of Transportation History, some other publications. And the central question in thinking about mobilities as a larger thing, the central question and study has been about this term called automobility. That automobility is a thing that has occurred in the last 150 years, and you can see it occur similarly but differently in different nations and regions. But automobility is this self-fueling, self-generating transition, not only in technology, but in the politics and the law and the things that make it possible, that automobiles basically create the necessary conditions for their own success. It is this self-expanding thing. And some people use the metaphor of something that positive. I sometimes fall back on it's a cancer. It's a thing that grows without stopping. And automobility is not simply an American thing. There's other versions of automobility, but it is a observable phenomenon that is incredibly powerful and that often pushes out other ways of living, associating, moving, working. And automobility is a historical phenomenon that we can study. And if it's a historical phenomenon that we can study, it's more and more meaningful than that terrible phrase that I had previously introduced, which is the American love affair with the cars. It is a thing that has inflection points and decisions and things that, unfortunately, I'm going to pun, drive it, and we can understand them. And the central question of why do Americans in the present day essentially have to have an automobile of their own, not just for the whole family. It has to be one vehicle per adult person, one vehicle per adult person, and they have to have it not only to work and to live and to recreate, but also it almost is a part of political identity, that you must have like a driver's license to vote. What insane! We have a democracy where one has to have that's a very strange thing. How did we get to that point? So the good news is this is a thing that we can study and understand, that automobility is not a force like gravity that has just occurred. Automobility has things that drive it that we can understand, and perhaps not do that quite as much in the future. And we can also see variations of it where other nations or regions have some automobility and don't let it take over. It is somewhat accidental or contingent, I guess, that American history hit those inflection points and by and large eliminated other options, to the point that we have at this point in time the freedom to only get around in one way. We've limited our freedom to one way of living. And it's sort of the accidents of the 20th century that have brought us to this point. I actually have now forgotten the question you asked that got me on such a rant. I had a thing to say about your show I wanted to get back to.
Well,
but
congratulations.
Did that rant go to places
you've now been the 189th person in a row to do exactly that. So that's good.
Well, no, actually, this gives me a good transition. Is one of the things that I wanted to say about your show, because you were talking about, watching movies and understanding that movies have the movies that we love have more to say than you might think. What I've gathered from listening to people on your podcast is one of the subcurrents of this show is that historians are people too, and that it's not necessarily the movies that have this encoded in them. It's us as historians who go look back at things from our childhood, or look at new films and new culture, and we look at it and we say, do you know what this is? It's not just a fantasy science fiction with laser swords set in a galaxy far, far away. It's also about empire and hegemony, and it's this quality of, I think, thinking people reflecting on stuff that you might brush away and say, well, this is not a very important. This is just a very silly movie about kids pulling pranks on each other, and in a small town, and yet, through some viewership, it can have a great deal more meaning to it.
No, and I'll tell you, that's one of the joys of this pod is like so many times, dude, I will sit here and talk to people, and the things that get told to me on like every episode basis regularly blow me away. Because I look at these films, and obviously I started this whole HATM thing and so forth, and people kind of look to me as like this guy that knows movies, and to some degree that's fair. But then people, and I always want people to come to me with these films that matter to them, right? Or have a special significance to their work. And as a result, you get these real deep thoughts on stuff. And it's almost like, when you're in graduate school and you would write something and you're like, this is what I think I'm writing. And then your advisor would read this and go, this is what you're doing. And you go, oh, okay. It's very much that process. My de facto advisor, who's Andrew Frank at Florida State University, I would send him all of my stuff because my advisor and I were always fighting. I would send this to Andrew. It's like, here, this is what you're writing. It's like, oh yes, that is clearly what I will tell David I meant to do. I would go back and forth between my academic parents. I want to ask you this, and this is a thing that I should have thought of earlier. And as you were talking, and this is the beauty of these conversations, you mentioned earlier that British filmmakers are often talking about class, and American filmmakers are talking about race. And I'm looking at this film going, wait, where are the black people in this movie? It's in Indiana in the 1970s. And I start thinking, wait a second. What about, and this is the question you get to ask about your work now, is thinking about, wait a second, who's riding these bicycles? Because I tend to, for better or worse, tend to look through the world through the gaze of a straight, middle-aged white dude from the Upper South, right? Are people of color taking to bikes in the same numbers as white folk? And what about the sexual dynamics of this? Are men and women adopting the bike as well at the same time? Like, what's going along these like racial and sexual lines when it comes to bicycles?
I really deeply appreciate you setting me up for this, because this is going to be on a whole nother rant. So one of the things about being an academic that I came to writing about bicycling history, and I wanted to do that partly because there were at the time very few academics writing about the bicycle. If Americans, by and large, don't take the bicycle seriously as a historical subject, historians are often Americans as well, and so historians also have not taken. But enthusiasts have, in enthusiast history, people who are very committed to bicycling as a subject have written in the past. And this has set up some very strange dynamics that have happened in more recent years, because as academic historians trained particularly in the examples of social history have gone to excavate the history of the bicycle and say, well, we should also look at this. The history of the bicycle also has encoded into it all of the racism, classism, sexism of American history. And you had asked me in the emails about what we should talk about Lance Armstrong. Well, we should talk about Major Taylor. Major Taylor is an African American racing cyclist of the turn of the century, who is incredibly famous, world famous at the time, international star, sometimes described as the first American international sports celebrity. And Major Taylor, for much of white America in the present, is unknown. Major Taylor is known for Black American, for Black cyclists in particular, because Major Taylor clubs are Black cyclist clubs across the United States. And the reason that those clubs are important, but that they're also quite rare and small, is that the sport of cycling in the era of Major Taylor, in the early 20th century, the sport of cycling actively drew the color line, pulled the curtain of Jim Crow um, into recreational cycling where it had not been. And there had been, particularly in northern cities, but also elsewhere, there had been African-American men and women who had become cyclists and become competitive cyclists, become recreational cyclists. And then in the topsy-turvy world of the logic of Jim Crow segregation, adult cycling, or the bicycle in general, became forbidden. It also would, it would be a thing that would be unsafe, certainly, because you'd be out alone and away from a community. And so African American cycling in the United States in the 20th century was incredibly rare and low because of racial segregation. It is built into the structure. The League of American Bicyclists, which is the modern day inheritor of the League of American Wheelmen, the League of American Wheelmen expels African American cyclists from its ranks in both southern and northern cities, and the southern chapters sort of require that the national draw the color line. And so in Boston, sort of perhaps home of American equality, African American cyclists are thrown out of League of American Wheelmen chapters. And so, Black cyclists are extremely rare throughout the 20th century because of this. And it is a sport that, through its associations, is associated with a white audience. And so when social historians started pulling out some of this deeply disturbing history, particularly it's, I've talked about race, but also the more recent immigrant groups at the turn of the century were discouraged from cycling and were mocked when they did so. It was associated with higher status, wealthier elites. And there's this negative stereotype that pushes out the poor, the recent immigrant, and this. We can talk about the different associations of cycling, but this I certainly persists in recreational cycling to the point that if you go to the peloton in Europe, to the professional cyclists, cyclists of color are extremely rare. There's certainly there's some things that are changing from Latin and South America, from Africa, but that is still extremely rare. This is a racially coded sport, as many sports are. And actually, to turn for a full circle, as social historians or academic historians or scholarly historians started pulling some of this out, and there's some really good history that has been published or is very recently coming out. The enthusiast historians who have sort of done this work in the past, but have not pulled out these exclusionary tendencies of a sport that is to them very important, have been very critical and have not been very happy about that at all. And so you've got the situation where scholarly histories will come out and they will be reviewed someplace, and the reviewer is someone who has been a bicycle sort of a historian of bicycling for a very long time, but will be extremely upset and very critical of what they read and say, no, the bicycle is only a tool of liberation. It has never been a tool of exclusion.
Oh, okay. I mean, I see, this is what I love, because now there's just so much, gosh, you could unpack now. I want to come back to the film for a second, James. You and I both have a love affair with this film. I think we both love it. What are your favorite parts of this movie? Just as a pure fan of the film, what do you love about it?
Okay, well, we haven't mentioned it yet, but the scene of and you kind of asked this question is, is this film indicative of what the experience of cycling would have been in 1979? And yes and no. The little 500 race at the end of is not a cycling race. It's a fraternity games stunt. It's a Greek games stunt, and the bicycles that are there are American track bikes. They're not very nice, and it's not tactics. It's not racing tactics. It's basically it's modeled on the Indy 500, and so it's a very strange thing. It's not a bike race, but there are bike races earlier in the film, and one of the things that's I think my favorite moments beyond Dave riding his bicycle through the woods in a moment of joy, sun shining down, and he's riding alone, and he's just talked to a girl, and he's spread his arms out, and he's just so happy. That's a moment of joy. But then also a thing that cyclists, when you bring up this movie, they will talk about Dave chasing the Cinzano truck. He's heard that the Italian team is coming to, and the Italian team is sponsored by a vermouth company, Cinzano, and so he shows up. There's no narration that explains this, but he shows up and he tucks away a map, so he's clearly figured out a place to set up. And he looks at his watch and he sees the truck coming, and he paces, and he basically motor paces behind the truck, and the truck driver sees him back there and gives him hand signs for how fast he's riding. And this is crazy. I mean, he gives him the hand signs for 60, which is you're not cranking 60 on a flat. You're maybe doing 50 downhill sometime. And then also it's just terrifying to imagine being pulled along in the vacuum behind a truck and so close to its wheels. This is all on what looks like a divided highway. And so this is both a thing that cyclists will say, that's crazy. I'd never do that. That's nuts. But then also, I think the excitement and joy and amazing thing to do with human power to be out on a road moving as quickly as an automobile and to be doing that yourself of your own volition. The kids these days say good use of free will. This is something Dave has just done, and he's done because he wants to and because it's a joy. And I think that actually does capture a little bit of what's powerful of many different kinds of cycling, be it gravel or mountain or road or touring or whatever. The good use of free will to be able to do something that you think of as a good idea. I'm going to go catch that truck. I'm going to go climb over that mountain. I'm going to go, string together these 5 climbs. I'm going to do this in less than 2 hours. This is that is a thing I think that captures for cyclists the love of the bike and the love of that freedom and free will.
I posted a clip on Instagram recently of things that are to come, conversations, historians, books, stuff like that. Obviously, I posted this. What do I post? I post a clip of this film. I post that scene. Because again, that to me is that is the joy of this film, is that scene. There's there's definitely for me the swimming scene with Dennis Quaid, running himself like this stubborn, I'm not going to be beaten by these people, that I always related to. My hot take is that Quaid could have been a Han Solo kind of guy. I thought so. Now I look at Quaid and I'm like, God, we lost you, bro. We lost you. Um, I have this thought as you were talking. You're talking about this amazing Italian bike that he has, right? That Dave's got. And I think of it almost like in this Excalibur-esque kind of moment. This is like this weapon, this thing, of this instrument of righteous power that allows him to become more than he is. And like all of these films have that, whether it's Luke and his lightsaber, or hell, even I'm thinking about The Color of Money and the Bambushka with Tom Cruise. I'm like, I kept thinking about this in terms of like Excalibur.
Well, but then I think it's a black feather from Dumbo, because his bike is broken. The dastardly Italians are, and this is part of, Dave has never ridden in a pack. He doesn't know a peloton. He doesn't know how to ride, and they get him with a lot of the standard tricks. They reach over and grab his down-tuned shifters and shift him out of gear. And then later they jam a frame pump in his wheel, and he goes flying, and the bike is ruined. And he loses his purpose in life, and it's sort of, he goes home and he doesn't have the Italian accent, and he cries in his father's arms, and he resists racing in the little 500, partly because the American-made Roadmaster bike, track bike that they're going to do it on is junk. It's not a Mazzi Grand Criterium with campy gears, and he overcomes that. He the black feather isn't needed. The magic is in him the entire time. And sort of that structure of the story, we see that over and over again in a variety of ways. The Mazzi Grand Criterion matters, but it actually doesn't.
God, that's so good. I wish I thought of that. Can I ask you some lightning questions that I did not prepare you
Hit me.
for? All right, I'm going to ask you some. How do cyclists respond to this film? Positively, negatively? Is this a popular movie in the cycling community?
Absolutely. I mean, people, if a cycling group needs to raise some money and they need to do something in the winter, you can just say we're gonna have a viewing of Breaking Away, or of Rad, the bicycle, the BMX movie. But there's a really positive, the fact that you can go out and buy Cutters bicycle jerseys, so a bicycle jersey with Cutters on it. This movie has a more positive association even than American Flyers, which is some way the more commercial Hollywood film that Steve Tesh also writes, that comes later. So there's a lot of positive associations with this, of cyclists of a certain age,
Okay.
which might be there might not be another generation of cyclists as exciting, but and I think that's good. It speaks to the quality of Breaking Away. It also speaks to the fact there's not a lot of other movies. There's not a lot of other film movies. There's Quicksilver Messenger Service. There's Rush, Premium Rush.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of other ones. So this might be either by quality or by default.
All right. Which leads actually into the next question. There may not be a lot of biking movies, but there are a lot of bikes in film. And I'm wondering, top of your head, most famous bike scene in movie history.
It would, man, this lightning round is really going to get me.
I thought this question up about 10 minutes ago, by the way. The rest of these questions I had prepped, and you're talking. I was like, I've got one.
Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Ooh, Pee-wee.
That is a movie that's entirely about the love of a bicycle, and it's motivated by a love of bicycle. And there's not a lot of other movies that are like that have that centrality.
Can I give you another one?
Sure.
E.T.
E.T. Well, and people talk about this, about Stranger Things being sort of a new edition of E.T., that those are those are both situations where um, the protagonists are children who need to have ways to get around, and they're getting around sort of suburban 1980s America on their bicycles, and uh, they have a great deal of power. I actually, in writing about some of this in the book Bike Battles, in my book, I had to go to Japanese cinema to find films that had more powerful associations with cycling for adults than for kids, and so the bicycle, particularly in post-war Japan, is a tool of national rehabilitation, but also of mobility and independence for young adults.
Thank you for giving me that, because I got Drew McKevitt coming on soon to talk about post-war. He's coming on to do Black Rain, the Michael Douglas film with Andy Garcia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. I've been on Drew for do you know Drew?
No, but I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, Drew's been on a couple times. The very first time he came on, he did Dirty Harry, and he's like, "Wait, I messed up." He's like, "I thought I was supposed to pick a movie I hate." I was like, "No, that's fine." And he spent an hour and a half just beating the shit out of Clint Eastwood.
Well, I mean, movies can. I have a love-hate relationship with The Searchers, and so I can go this
Pin
way
that
and
one,
that
because
way
we
on
can
The
come back to
Searchers.
that, because I would love to do that film here. One policy change that would transform cycling in America overnight.
Oh my goodness, your lightning questions are absolutely
I'm bringing it.
extreme. So the policy change that would make, so one of the things that I would say about this concept of automobility that I introduced earlier, and the fact that that automobiles sort of are self-driving and self-expanding, and there's a variety of ways that that's happened. It's through zoning laws, it's through parking laws, it's through a variety of tools that have sort of horsed our economy and our cities and our society to serve a single purpose. But I think none of those drivers are as important as funding. And we have had a variety of decisions in the United States, be it the way that property taxes pay for city streets, but then also the national gasoline tax pays for interstate highways. And so I think that the number one way that we could change things in America for bicycles or for other transportation would actually be to make cars pay for themselves, because we actually have gotten streets and highways become so expensive that they can't actually be paid for out of gasoline taxes anymore, and so we're pulling from the general fund. And so the single largest transformation we could have is if 1% of streets funding or 1% of highway funding was put towards bicycles. That would multiply the amount of money spent on bicycle infrastructure by hundreds, if not thousands, of times. 1% of what is spent for automobile movement, if spent on bicycles, would completely transform the way we get around. And also, actually, if we just draw the line and say cars have to pay for themselves, and only gasoline taxes pay for it, that would also that would change things rapidly.
Is that something you think that the automobile manufacturers and big oil fear? Are they purposely trying to lobbying to keep biking down as an alternative?
I do try to get away from sort of feeling conspiratorial about who's controlling things, and in the United States, there's a long-standing sort of conspiracy feeling or explanation about what ended transit and trolley cars in American cities, because American cities were walking cities to start with, and transit, street cars were a way that people got around until World War II. And there's sort of a conspiratorial explanation that says that automobile companies conspire to get that. And I think that's the problem is that there's enough truth to it that it sort of makes everyone feel that it's completely true, and that there's that absolutely Goodyear and GM and other automobile companies did everything they could to kill off transit and streetcars. But then also Americans voted to end those, and voted to do so because the streetcars had become run down and destroyed and not invested in, and they were largely run by private companies that people didn't like. And so I do want to say that these are decisions we've made as a democracy, and we can unmake them. We can make other decisions, no matter what conspiratorial, shadowed, cigar-filled room might be doing things. We can change things.
Last lightning round question. If Dave from Breaking Away were still alive today, what kind of bike would he ride?
Oh, man. Well, I got to tell you, we've talked about sort of different bike booms where new technology or new changes come along. The e-bike revolution is wild, and I'm not certain a lot of people understand what is coming. I believe that in a number of years or decades from now, this word e-bike isn't going to make any sense to people, because essentially bikes and e-bikes are just going to converge, and they're going to be the same. And a lot of the people who are most interested in, most empowered by, get around the most, and are seniors and retirees who were not previously cyclists in their lives and have discovered a way of living and a way of getting around that they didn't know was possible. And this is one of the things that I say about automobility, that we sort of say, well, automobility, it has to happen. It's gravity. It's the way we sort of think that because it's all we've ever known. We've not known other things. Americans go to a very small list of places where you can get around on foot or by bike, and those are college campuses, Disneyland, and European tourism destinations. And the rest of America isn't like that. But if you put somebody on an e-bike, if you loan somebody an e-bike for a week, and they don't even have to be a cyclist, I think that Dave, since he likes high technology, would like a Gazelle e-bike, something that's top of the line.
You mentioned earlier, we didn't even talk about like mountain biking. We didn't get into BMX. As you were talking, I was thinking, what? There's a healthy population of hunters who have adapted to taking bikes because they're quieter, and you can take your hunting gear in deeper into the woods. You can haul your harvest out of the woods. Like there's a whole like utilitarian version of bikes that are being used by like these hyper outdoorsy masculine men and women, or not men and women who are out there hunting, right? That's right. You never really thought.
A totally different user base.
Yeah, totally, right? Which is kind of exciting and cool, I think, to see it happening.
Yeah, we can tell when they come into the shop. I volunteer at a shop on Friday afternoons, rebuilding bikes for kids or for shelters, and we sort of, a guy walks in camo, like, okay, all right, I know you would like to, and the manufacturers have made bikes that are camo patterned, and so they're clearly aware of that. So
it's cool. All right. Second to last question for you. If someone made Breaking Away today, what does that movie look like?
I don't know if that movie exists. I mean, because we've been talking about how this movie is better than it should be. And I think it has a sweetness to it and a smallness to it. And unfortunately, Hollywood is somewhat allergic to films that are less than $40 million budget-wise now. I don't know if that exists.
I don't know if the America of this failing of this like Rust Belt, place of 47 years ago exists. It's right. It's the conditions were kind of perfect for this story to be set the way it. And like as you and I are talking about, please nobody make this movie again. Don't
Well,
remake
now
this.
that I'm thinking about it, I think that this movie might be Ted Lasso. It might be a movie that's about sports, but not about sports. It's about class, but not about class. It's about masculinity, and it's humorous and small and sweet.
You know, I've got bones to pick with Ted Lasso because it pushed me out. I was the number 2 most famous Wichita State affiliated person. I've got a bachelor's and master's degree from Wichita State, and so does Bill Parcells. I guess the Big Show of Paul White also has it, but either way, he pushed us down. All right, James, you wrote this book. We've been talking about this film set in the past for a while. What's in the future for you? What's next? What are you working on? What comes next for you?
Well, Bike Battles is nearly a decade now. I'm sort of coming towards that, and I have been working on another project, and it's been delayed because essentially I'm going to blame COVID. I was really making progress, and then the demands of service teaching and sort of horsing around our curriculum and teaching schedule since to respond to COVID and then to unrespond to COVID have made it difficult to make progress. But I've got another project that I've been working on, and it continues the sort of theme that I'm interested in arguments that people have about cities as places to live. And I wrote about Pittsburgh as being both a place to work and a place to live, and it has to be both of those things. But sometimes the work makes it impossible to live, right? And then I went to Bike Battles. I was interested in cities as, both places to get around and to recreate, and then also to movement that's necessary for us to live our lives, to get to shops and school and home. And both of those things make people unreasonably angry. People got unreasonably angry about air pollution control in Pittsburgh. It made for huge public debates. People get just bizarrely angry about bicycles in cities to the point of danger. And so I was sort of kicking around. I wanted something that people argue about in the same way, because I think it gives away the game, I think. And I think that I may have found the thing that's so basic and quotidian and everyday as to be overlooked, and yet makes people furious. And the subject is, of course, the history of parking. And this is yes, an untold history, and it's about our cities. And there's a lot to say there that people historians have not dug out. It's about automobility and rebuilding our cities for cars. And it also makes people absolutely insane in ways that are unexpectedly gendered and based in racial segregation, and also downright violent.
Can I tell you, this might be the first pod, if we do this book, that we tie to a music video, because I'm thinking immediately about Bob Seger's Night Moves, parking at the outdoor drive-through films. Like, I'm in. Like, okay, yes, absolutely. So
well, don't forget that Cool Hand Luke starts with Paul Newman cutting the heads off of parking meters, and that's what he goes to jail for.
Buddy, you're starting. You're going Cool Hand Luke. You're going Searchers. You're gonna have to come back on. Like, we're gonna have to do this again.
Absolutely.
And in fact, this has been yet another one of the films where we have actually gone longer than the runtime of this film in our conversation. And I think that was just because it was so awesome. Like, it was our first talk we've ever had. And dude, I was loving the book. I got to relive the film and then talk to you about this. This has been a blast. So
Jason, I've really enjoyed it.
And that's a wrap here at Reckoning with Jason Herbert. Thank you so much to our guest, James Longhurst. James wrote this amazing book called Bike Battles, A History of Sharing the American Road. If you want to find it, you can absolutely do so. We'll put a link to it in the show notes on the page. Thank you so much to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for making this show operate, for editing this show, including the many, many, many times I tried to get the introduction and conclusions on this right. Thank you, Fletcher, for being here. And most of all, thank you to all of you for continuing to be here to share this podcast, to be supporters of this. If you want to find out more, you can go to my Substack at jasonherbert.substack.com or look for me online. You can find me on social media at Herbert History on Blue Sky or on Instagram. Guys, thank you so much for being here, for sharing this show, for telling me how much it means to you. It means the world to me that you do so. We've got a whole bunch of more stuff coming for you real soon, so stick around. Ciao for now. Bye.